And that is a controversy in Minneapolis and in St. Paul. Everyone's talking about it, at least, you know, in the pews and on the street or whatever, but it's not really being addressed from anyone higher up, and I'm not sure why, but I was solicited to speak a few words into that scenario. I offered a couple of words and stayed far away, but here's the deal. I'm going to give you the general principle. A musician, whether they are playing a guitar, playing an organ, singing in the choir, whatever, that is a person, that is they're a worship leader of a kind. They're standing in front of God's people in the context of a worship service, and they are leading the way as the people musically offer praise to God under these people's headship. So one of the big problems in the Twin Cities is that you will find out that many young musicians who were wanting to play a guitar and play a drum, and they wanted to be in a band or whatever, they wanted to be a singer, having trouble getting a lot of gigs at the clubs or the bars or whatever venues. When there's a church that's in need of musical talent for a musician, you're like, wow, there's a guaranteed gig. You know, every single week I've got a standing spot, you know what I mean? A 52-week stand or whatever you want to call it. Some of the smaller churches that have to look for things like that, they're hurting financially, but it doesn't stop the musician from saying, hey, I want an honorarium every week, $50, $100, whatever it is. And so this person, without regard to what they believe or how they live, because the church is that thirsty for musical talent or voice talent, they get put in front of God's people. And when that person is in some kind of apostasy, whether it's doctrine, whether it's life practice, or whatever, the people in the pews who are fleshly and earthly and care about emotions instead of truth, all they care about is their emotional rock concert. So you could find out your organist is gay, your musician is beating his wife, you know, your singer's a crackhead, or whatever, and you're willing to look the other way in exchange for having the music. That's a church that is in sin and is making God angry. And the leadership at the top has the duty to speak and to say something. One of the big problems in Minneapolis is that much of the musical talent in the church is no more a Christian than your dog. There's the opening of the praise and the worship, and then you get to the part where, you're having the music, people are rocking out, and then you get to the message. That's when the heathen musician steps outside, returns a couple of voicemails, does some text messaging, smokes a cigarette, and they're waiting for that moment in the sermon where the preacher becomes Hollywood and wants to close it out in an entertaining way and is going to need musical accompaniment behind him to add to the atmosphere. They wait on that moment where the preacher changes it up. And even I, as a preacher, have been guilty when I know that the organist is drunk or something. I always use the phrase, I'm getting set to close now, because that means I'm going to be coming to my conclusion. And yeah, with the musical accompaniment behind me, it adds to the impact. So the preachers have this saying, I'm preaching to myself. It means the thing I'm talking about, so you know I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not holding you to a standard that I myself refuse to live by. I'm talking about a problem that many of you face that I'm also guilty of. I'm preaching to myself. And when it comes to musicians, I'm telling you, I'm preaching to myself in that regard. I'm guilty of having looked the other way when there's been a guy or a lady with a dynamic voice who you know their moral and spiritual life is trash, but you don't care because the singing is that good. I had a good friend when I was a kid. He grew up to be a pastor. And even though it was one of those skateboarding white churches, he fell under Mark Driscoll's influence. So he was involved in the Soma movement, where the big macrocosmic church breaks down into microcosmic little cell groups and communities, as it were. He got into weird crap like that, hipster 1990s white rock and roll garage band kind of philosophy. One of the things this guy had that was right, that was on point, was that he knew that your musical leader who's picking the music there's theology in music. And so he made sure that on his plurality of elders, elder board style of government, that the guy in charge of music was an elder. And so that it was a musical preaching kind of thing. And I think it held that musical minister to a certain standard. And I think that would be a good model if you have a choir director or a guy or lady in charge of music, making that person part of a leadership role where they're held to accountability. And then the people that are under them as members of the choir, members of the band, are holding them to a standard. You don't want to fill your choir, you don't want to fill your musician place with a bunch of godless heathen people. Because what they're doing out there in the community, people know about, and it just makes your church look like there's no standards. And as I said earlier, for those of you just tuning in, I have a little bit of a cold going on. There's some kind of mucus in front of the vocal cords, slight laryngitis, but the show must go on, right? So no, the position of musician, we treat it very cheaply, like it's just heathen talent for hire, but really music is under the glory and magnification of God in the house of worship, and the people leading it should be living and believing properly to the best of their ability with God's help, and held to standards and accountability by church leadership. When you don't have that, it carries within it the seeds for chaos and ultimately gross scandal. And that issue you're writing me about in St. Paul, Minneapolis, is a gross scandal. And everybody who's looking the other way, may God reward them according to their deeds. You know what I mean?